Hello, everyone. Welcome to part 3 of our deep dive into the Cessna 182, getting into kind of my experiences with the plane, as well as kind of how its ins and outs sort of a thing. This is going to be fun today because we're going to be landing at lovely old Bedford, which is a great little airport right outside of Boston. And we're going to be seeing one of the places where I think the Cessna 182 falls really, really flat onto the ground, and that's landing. Well, we'll take a look when we get there. Let's get started. So what we have here is looking right off my 12 o'clock is we're doing our descent. Everything's been pre-configured. It's ready to rock. My descent speed is literally textbook. My power is textbook. Everything about our setup right now is indicative of definitely knowing what this plane needs to do. If I don't toot my own horn a little bit there. Of course, when we go to landing it, watch how hard this thing hits the ground. There, and I'll lose my credibility a little bit is the best way to describe it. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be coming into a left downwind here, and we're going to be swinging around and popping this thing down on the ground nice and smooth. Of course, in the real world, we have to deal with air traffic control. They'll be calling the shots and telling us what we can and cannot do. And for those of you who like Boston, right over there. But we're not flying to Boston today. Like I said, we're flying to Bedford, which is easy. So a couple things we need to think about with this airplane when we're coming to land. The first thing is the fact that this plane, once the flaps descend, wants to stop flying. This is nothing like a Cessna 172 where you cut the power and it's like, oh, I can kind of just sort of make it happen. This plane is done flying if you're at the correct speed and you cut that throttle. The next problem we're going to have, and this is a really, really fun problem for people who are brand new to this plane, is when we're coming into land, when we reduce power, we expect the nose to come down, like lose a little bit of speed, maybe lose a little bit of altitude. A little power reduction goes a massive way with this plane when the flaps are completely out. One of the things I learned to do flying this one is don't put the flaps out until you're really ready to put the thing on the ground. Our classic coffin corner, when you're going from base to final, which will be kind of right in here where you see my mouse, gets even more dangerous with this plane because if we have all that drag going, it'll slow down. Now, one of the things people are really surprised with this plane is when I come down here and I take a look at my airspeed indicator, you'll observe that my stall speed is 40 knots. Now, if you have a calculator out, you go 40 times 1.3, and you get an approach speed of 52 knots. You cannot approach the ground at 52 knots with this plane. The nose will be up massively, number one. And number two, any power reduction or loss of power, which would be more dangerous, will result in a catastrophic collision of the front wheel with the ground. It's going to be a nightmare to maintain that. So instead, the book, when you're flying the traditional version in miles per hour, actually recommends 75 miles per hour, which for us is between 60 and 65 knots. You can definitely come in at 60. If you're a little bit lighter, you can definitely come in at 65 if you want to be a little bit safer. For me in this plane, going too fast is dangerous, going too slow is twice as dangerous. So for me, we usually stick between 60 and 65 knots is going to get you a pretty comfortable speed, kind of making your final approach here. Like I said, anything faster than that is just it's gonna give you issues. So by the way, I'm I'm modifying my mixture here to keep my turbine temperature at a happy temperature right now, which is what we want. But I'll be maintaining this approach directly. So the next problem you're facing, of course, is trying to get this plane slow down enough to be able to successfully execute the landing. You can see how we've started our descent in the last episode, and it took us 2 days to get here. That's what it's like flying the Curtis Jenny. But the tricky thing here is getting a good speed in the traffic pattern, but remembering that any power reduction, especially with flaps, is going to stop you in a hurry. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and manually take over for a second here, and I'm going to keep my power in the green here as I start to settle in. And I'm actually going to carry us a little bit to the left here, and the reason I'm doing that is I want to give myself a little more room to kind of roll out of my turn. So I'm basically running perpendicular. Keep in mind, of course, in the real world, air traffic control, you can actually see the tower right off my right side of my screen there. He'd be giving you all sorts of fun instructions on what I should and should not be doing. I love all the beeps and bonks this plane makes. It's so amusing to me. I don't know why. I love this. Of course, the wind noise in this plane is pretty loud in this, especially at speeds like this. You would hear every bit of this. My ears would be popping furiously because we're 800 feet per minute, but that would kind of be the piece. So that's looking pretty good. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to gently go ahead and roll out. Keep in mind we're at a very critically high speed. We're well above our maneuvering speed. And we're going to start settling into the traffic pattern here. And again, we're coming in pretty fast here. We're basically rocket shipping this. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that out. I'm going to go ahead and slowly increase the RPM on the propeller. And what that's going to do for us is that's going to help facilitate slowing down. And I'm just going to be settling in very, very gently here. I feel like I'm Elmer Fudd. Trying to creep into our traffic pattern here. Again, we're going very fast for traffic pattern. These are Cirrus speeds for the traffic pattern. These are not 182 speeds for the traffic pattern. Yeah, we're starting to settle in pretty nicely. I can actually look out. We're doing a nice little downwind here. I've got a nice little lovely look at that runway. One thing that we would do in the real world, of course, is set everything up early. And you can see we're runway 29er today. One thing I would do, of course, is I'd come in there and I'd very, very carefully and cautiously dial in the correct heading onto my heading bug, but I can't do that. Let's go ahead and pull the nose up. This is going to be a pretty good altitude. And I'm just going to hold the nose up. Now, as we hold this nose up without adding any power, you'll notice you instantly slow down. We're going to slow down so much, in fact, that I can actually deploy my first click of flaps. So we're going to go ahead and get ready for landing here. I'm going to go ahead and now put my mixture in all the rest of the way. That looks pretty good to me. Notice how easily this thing slows down. It takes very little effort. Looking out the window there, I can see at the end of the runway, we can actually begin our 500 feet per minute descent. Looks pretty good. I'm going to pull the nose up just a tiny bit more so I can get that second click of flaps in there. You can see we're just in the white arc. It's one thing that's very hard to get away with in the 172 here. Go ahead and look out the back, and that's about 45 degrees, and we'll go ahead and execute our turn. All right, let's do it. Go ahead and execute a nice smooth turn here. Of course, when I was pushing buttons, I accidentally hit the autopilot button. That's okay. And we're going to go straight base to final here because we're nice and tight, and that's perfectly fine. Looking out the wind, you can see how we're just a little bit close, but that's pretty typical. And again, in the real world, I have the ability to kind of look out the window. Actually, we're pretty good here. We're pretty good. We're a little high, but that's perfectly fine. We're going to come swing around this way. You can see we're doing about 75 miles an hour. Pretty good speed. We're also getting nice and slow. Pull that nose up. Nose up. There we go. And that'll help out kill off the last bit of speed here. And we're just coming around to final. I'm going to go ahead and click in the final click of flaps there. All right, we're looking pretty good. We're doing about 68 knots there. I was about 67. Now, this is when it gets interesting. I'm going to lock my nose on the end of the runway there. And I'm just going to keep my nose at the same distance above the dashboard. And I want you to just observe something. And that's the insane vertical speed this aircraft is doing. If you look over there on the right, you will see I'm doing 900 feet per minute descent with this thing right now. Now, if I add about, let's say, half a throttle of throttle, notice I'm still dropping at about 800 feet per minute, and I'm just now starting to catch this airplane and being able to have massive control over it. So I'm coming in for landing here. 63 knots is basically perfect. Looking pretty good there. Looking pretty good. Looking pretty good. Oh no, a Cessna 172 is pulling onto the runway. Let's get out of here. So what we're going to do is we're just going to hold it up just like that. And as we saw before, when this plane has its flaps, it's just going to be tanking. And the first time I did this, by the way, and you don't get this experience sitting at you looking at your cell phone right now, is how slammed into the seat you get when you do that. So I'm going to bring up the flaps nice and gently. This plane is just going to go, oh. That's a technical term for not wanting to climb, by the way. Just going to go like that. So we'll go ahead and give it one more click of flaps there. There's my 7.5. And we're just going to transition from our VX straight up to our VY of 95 knots. So one of the things you have to be mindful of course, is when you do this, we have got to open the engine cowl flaps. And one of the things I don't have is a button for that. But that would have been one of the first things I slammed down as soon as we start this gentle little climb here. The other thing that will surprise you is how aggressive the trim will be on you when you transition from these modes. So let's go ahead and take this one back around the pattern again. I'll do it a little bit more safely this time. You can see how we've cleared it pretty well as far as that goes. Execute my nice gentle left turn, and we'll go get going. Now the pattern speed for this one, you can do basically 100 knots is plenty. I don't think you'll have too much issue with that. One thing you'll be really surprised about, of course, is if you have no flaps out, you can use about half throttle, and that's plenty. That'll keep you at a pretty comfortable speed at a comfortable altitude without really having to fight anything too seriously. Of course, we're sitting here with a 30-degree turn. That's a bit scandalous, but that's perfectly fine. And just look at how much radius this thing sucks down at 100 knots here. It really is not a 172. It definitely has its own personality as far as this goes, and you have to really respect it as far as those kind of pieces go. Just enjoy my next turn here. I'm going to come swinging around just about straight. There we go. We can tell we're just about under downwind now. Lots of right foot, by the way, at this speed with this plane. And we're perfect, basically perfect. I can look out the window now, and you can see we're on the downwind leg. Looks good. One thing we want to do is we want to make sure the plane is pretty well trimmed. That's something that I learned many times with this plane, is when you go to pull the nose up to get it off the ground for the final landing there, be ready for the weight of that nose. It will surprise you, and then it will disappoint you because there's no airflow over the tail, and then it gets really light, and then the nose doesn't lift up, and then you have to pull up even harder. It is just such a different experience with this plane if you've been flying nothing but 172s this whole time. I know they say, well, it's just a heavier 172. Yeah, it's like a heavier, slightly not as well designed 172 is the best way I would describe it, actually. All right, pulling across there. That looks pretty good right there. I like that. feeling really good there. Speed looks beautiful. I'm going to go ahead and top in 2 clicks of flaps here. Let the nose kind of slow down on its own, and we're just going to transition into our lovely descent. That's going to take us down onto the ground once more. Going to go pull the power back. It does not take much. One thing we want to do is we want to secure that. A good idea, too, of course, is hit the fuel pump, landing lights, everything like that. I'm not going to reach down and hit that just yet. I'm just going to be looking around for my 45-degree angle. 500 feet per minute is pretty good. Usually during this phase, for us, it would have been 80 to 90 miles an hour. That's probably about 75 to 80 knots. We're moving pretty quick here. This is actually a pretty good spot. Oh my gosh, left foot. You're going to have to stomp on that huge rudder on this thing. Like I said, it'll stun you how much it takes. And again, we're not touching that big click of flaps. And that's something that I learned really, really tricky. One of the things that you can do with this plane, by the way, is if you want to have more work than you've ever had in an airplane before, is try to land it with no flaps. Without any flaps to help you get a slightly better nose-up attitude when you go to land, you're pulling like 14, 15 degrees and almost strike the tail. It's interesting. It's very, very, very interesting, this plane. And that's looking pretty good. We're just going to square it off now, and we're going to start setting ourselves up for landing here. Altitudes look pretty good, actually. Looking pretty good. Start bringing in that last click of flaps and start slowing down to our 60 to 65. Again, lots of left foot right now, I should say. There we go. So now our altitude is almost perfect. So we have 2 reds, we have 2 whites, so we're much better established. Airspeed's a little high, and this is when we get fun. So getting this plane stable takes more time than you're used to in a 172. A lot of other planes, you can kind of freestyle it, I like to call it, all the way down to the ground. With this plane, you really have to kind of get everything smooth, set up, and ready to go before you kind of get to that kind of last phase there. The reason being, of course, is because of that incredible drag you get from the flaps on it. So we're doing about 63, which is basically perfect. I have 2 reds, 2 white. We're basically perfect there. Power is about 14. Everything's set. Looks good. Landing lights are set in my imagination. I'm not going to reach over and press it right now. Getting a little nose up. That's not unusual. Just give it a tap of power. And that's all it takes. And you can gently reduce it. There's a lovely 2.9er. And what you're going to do is, as you get close, you're going to gently reduce power, and then you're going to transition to a nose landing altitude. All right, looks pretty good there. All right, looks good. Start smoothly pulling back, and here's where this plane gets annoying. So this is level, but remember, we need to flare to land. So I actually have to pull up even higher, and this is a 7-degree nose-up attitude. And there we are, down on the ground. You can see just a gentle little drift there. Let the nose come down the rest of the way. I can't emphasize enough how critically important this aircraft is to be able to... We already had the flaps out the whole time, by the way. We should have left those closed for landing. The big thing here is just how much nose up you need to do to keep this thing smooth. And it will surprise you the first couple, especially if you're really, really heavy or you have nose up. So now what we're going to do is we're going to make our way all the way down. Nice brakes. Don't, by the way, jerk the controls in this plane. It's a great way to flip the plane. Remember, of course, you have those bungee cords, the kind of rubber bands for our rudders, kind of a pain in the butt. On the ground, of course, we want to go ahead and open up those. We want to shut off our fuel pumps. We want to make sure our lights are set correctly and everything along those lines. And we're looking really lovely here. We've done basically everything correctly here. A couple little tiny things as I sort of brought them up. Of course, so when you finally get this plane down on the ground after having to pull back that hard in order to get the thing nose down, you're like, did I strike the tail? I really hope I didn't strike the tail. Just to give you an idea of how ridiculous that can be. So I think that's a pretty fun looking parking spot right there. So I'm just going to steal that one. Of course, one of the things you learn as a new pilot in the real world is when you first, of course, arrive at an airport you've never been to, you have no idea where to park. It's just kind of one of those silly things that you have to deal with. And of course, what we'll do now is we'll secure. You'll notice I lean the mixture after landing there. Make sure our flaps are in the up position. One thing we want to do is secure avionics just like that. Nice and easy. You're going to get a little kind of reversionary mode here. Like, we never get to see this button in action. It never works. Too bad. So one of the things we want to do is we're just going to rev it up just a tiny bit here. One of the problems we have is we are a turbine. That means that thing needs to cool off before we do anything scary with it. The good news is it had plenty of time to cool off. The bad news is we still need to let it cool off. So we basically kind of run it up just a little bit, slowly reduce the power, and now we can go ahead and transition into our gentle reduction. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to slowly pull the mixture up. Usually what happens is the RPM goes up a little bit, and then it goes, oh, then it just sort of dies on you. Hey, I'm still working. Pull that out the rest of the way. We don't do anything until the propeller stops turning. Notice, by the way, it takes a long time. The real one will go chick, 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 and that's about as much as it does. Come over here. Baking gets shut off. We shut the master battery switch off, and incredibly, I can actually shut the emergency battery off as well. Enjoy.